Hijabs and hoodies deemed baddies, not goodies, blamed for society's ill, justifying reason to kill, looking for a scapegoat, taking us by the throat or with the shot of a gun. No need after to hide or run, because the law doesn't protect the victim. It defends them, the murderers and racists, endorsing their hatred. Blame the hood, the cap, the locks, the hijab, the braids, the head wrap, the kufi, the turban, the skull cap, the tam, the scarf, the cornrows, the way your hair grows. But really, it's about the race, the religion, the face of the person wearing, not what they're wearing. Call it ignorance or fearing, but it's the hatred of being racist, Islamophobic, xenophobic, thinking that justifies the taking of lives. Imagine if having your face meant your child wasn't safe when they walked on the street. Imagine having to warn your child daily of the dangers that might be. Look out, son, for the EDL, the BNP, the KKK, and the police as you go on your way. Oh, and generally, crazed racists armed with weapons to cause you harm. Bag of Skittles, can of iced tea, doesn't sound menacing to me. Could have been Obama's son, your son, my son, but he was the son of his pops and mum, now shot, distraught, grieving, weeping, feeling, hurt and dejected, miserably found and rejected by a state, the law, the system that doesn't protect the victim but allows the perpetrator to claim self-defense, whilst the law accepts this pretense and records the death of another bright, beautiful young man as a statistic tested and done. Their lives were precious, unique, special, not another's to rule. Every young person with dreams and aspirations is someone else's inspiration. But to the authorities who treat them with disdain, they only had themselves to blame. It was the way they looked, spoke, dressed that justified stabbing, shooting them in the head, the chest. Negative, racist, ignorant stereotyping that led to them lying there fighting for one last breath of life-filled air, while snapshots of their time here flash before them, signaling the end. For now they must transcend, seeking peace in a better place, whilst knowing it was just because of their race that their lives were stolen. And in that final moment, praying that history will not repeat and the good people will defeat the evil and prejudice of racism, stamp on the hatred of racism. So now that's what we must do, because if we don't, it could be you or me, next day, next month, next year, and the horror of that is too much to bear. Thank you.
He saw a hooded figure. So the trees are no longer decorated with strange southern fruits, but Trayvon Martin still gets no justice when Zimmerman shoots. The latter claimed he had the right to simply stand his ground, but first, against police advice, he followed young Trayvon around, trying to decide, I guess, if the teenager really posed a threat. But judging by what Trayvon was packing, he was as wrong can get. He carried a sugar-coated rainbow that will never sweeten this pill, and a cold can of iced tea he will never get to swill. No drugs, no weapons, no alcohol, in fact, nothing illegal. So what struck such fear into this man's heart? What made him commit an act so evil? Who gave him the right to challenge this young man, may I inquire? Why did he decide to start the exchange which would end life with fatal fire? He saw a hooded figure, who he could see was not his kin. Yes, he saw a hooded figure, but he also saw his skin. He saw a hooded figure. He made his blood run red. He saw a hooded figure, and the young man now is dead. For 44 days and nights, the gunman kept his liberty. You can draw your own conclusions as to just why that might be. They claimed Trayvon was armed with the very ground on which he walked, but he didn't bring it with him, and he was the one being stalked by an armed man who chose to leave the safety of his car. Why was Zimmerman not satisfied to follow from afar? I have a pack of questions, but answers are too few. Yet that the southern states lack justice is surely nothing new. For while I hear the trees are no longer decorated with strange hanging fruits, a young black man gets no justice when it's a white man who shoots.
This poem is called Black Britain and Black America. These so-called chips on our shoulder are the building blocks of equality. I do not need permission to recall my history. Black Britain and America are not the same, but we see you and we feel your pain. I am Trayvon Martin. For our races and birthplaces, we are not to blame. I stare into this shattered mirror, a society that reflects our own. Black America, you are not alone. Our paths are not parallel, but our struggles need not be separate. If we teach our children never to forget that before any wars on terror, there were wars on our humanity, labeling us less than we were born to be, equal. Though most days it feels we are guilty until proven innocent, failures until we achieve something excellent. But it's also our right not to excel, to live normal, decent lives and not fear bullets and jail, not to have to justify our existence or presence in countries built on our backs with no thanks or penance. It's not just the taxis and black cabs not stopping for us. It's the police and civilians targeting us. It's losing out to the white candidate despite the same qualifications or getting the job, and people calling it positive discrimination. Yes, I've got a big black chip on my shoulder, and this pink one too. LGBT and feminist, I will stand by you. America, I've only stood on your soil once, and I don't understand all of your laws, but yours is a struggle I cannot ignore. There are many struggles that need to unite too. Native Americans and Australians, I see you in this black mirror made of more than glass. But they say it's not about race now, it's only about class. Thank you.
We're standing here in solidarity with Trayvon Martin's family. Today, in the States, we see that there is every 28 hours a young black person is killed either by the cops or by vigilantes because of the racism that's engendered by American capitalism. We also see as well that in the States, what are the roots of that? Where young black men are more likely to be suffering in prison than they are to be getting a college education. By the way, we have exactly the same situation now in Britain. Exactly the same situation where young people, black men in Britain, are more likely to be languishing in prison than they are to be rightfully sitting in front of their books and getting a higher education so that they can get on and progress. And that's the racism that's endemic in capitalism that tries to divide black and white workers in particular. We organised one of the first demonstrations against the vicious murder of Stephen in 1993. In fact, we had been calling for, along with other community organisations and also trade unions in the local area, for the closing down of the BNP headquarters in Welling. Let's face it, if the police had infiltrated that organisation back in 91 or 92, Stephen may well have been alive today. But instead they concentrate their fire on anti-racist, fighting for justice for Stephen, fighting for justice for his family, justice for the other young people that had been murdered in that area as well. And we now say that there has to be a full public inquiry into that infiltration. Who was it who gave the orders for those for that infiltration to take place? That is absolutely out of order. That should not have been allowed to happen. That those anti-racist organisations should have been spied on, should have been infiltrated, and in fact they were using that. What were they attempting to do? To smear the Lawrence family campaign for justice for their murdered son. So we need to make sure that we campaign in our communities, that we make sure in working class communities, particularly in black communities, that we campaign against the level of police harassment and racism that there is. Black young people are still 30 times more likely to be stopped and searched on the streets, particularly in London. So we need to make sure that that campaign against that police level of harassment goes on.
I'm here to bring greetings from the People's Assembly, which is an attempt to build a mass movement against austerity in this country. And I don't think we need any reminding that when we talk about austerity here, that people from the BME community are the worst affected in terms of what is happening in this country. That if you look at the cuts, if you look at unemployment, if you look at all the government policies, they are hitting the poorest hardest. And that means black people are being hit very, very hard indeed. And when you add to that the institutional racism which we know exists in this country, then we're talking about levels of racism and levels of discrimination which we have to fight against. A lot of the speeches today have been talking about the situation in the United States and the situation with Trayvon Martin and the terrible, terrible things that have happened to black people in that country. But we shouldn't forget the terrible, terrible racist murders that have happened in this country as well. We have had generation after generation has had to fight against those racist murders. If you think of the murders going back decades now, if you think of the campaigns that people had going back decades now, and people talk about multiculturalism in London, but multiculturalism was only ever fought for as part of black people standing up for their rights and demanding that they wouldn't have racism, they wouldn't have racist landlords, they wouldn't have racism in jobs, they wouldn't have all those discriminations. And what we have today in London is actually a sign of people having fought for generations over it. But we have to be aware that racism is still a big issue here. When you have a government which is sending round vans saying that so-called illegal immigrants and asylum seekers should hand themselves in and go home, this is like what the National Front said 30 or 40 years ago. This racist discourse is one which is going to get worse as we get nearer to the election. It will get worse in the way that if you look in Australia, all the main parties are now scapegoating immigrants, and when they talk about immigrants, we know they talk, if this is about race. When they talk about crime, this is about race. When they talk about Islam, this is about race, and we have to be absolutely clear what a racist society that we live in. And that is why the People's Assembly is very, very much committed to fighting black and white over the question of austerity. Because what they're doing with this is divide and rule. They're trying to blame our neighbours for what goes wrong. They blame the unemployed over the employed. They blame black people over white people. Those are things that we cannot accept. And therefore, if we want to fight austerity, if we want to fight this government, we have to fight to end the attacks on benefits, to end the attacks on the welfare state, to end the attacks on the health service, to end all of those attacks. And that is something that has to be done by black and white people together. So I'm very proud to be here today. I think we live in a country which has a racist history going back to slavery, just as the Americans do. The city of London was built on slavery. The banking system in this country was built on slavery. And we have a debt that we still have to reckon with against those people. That is why we have to fight and campaign and overthrow the kind of society in which we live, and let's create a society which is fairer and more equal for everybody within.